everyone, Cleo here, and today I'm going over my November wrap-up. So for the month of November I'm gonna do it traditionally. I'm just gonna go through all of the books at once. I have been doing it kind of vlog style for the past few months. I will be returning that, but within the month of November, with me leaving on a 2-week holiday at the very beginning of the month, I just it was the 20th or so and I still hadn't filmed a single vlog clip, and then I was like, you know what, I might as well just combine them all together at the end of the month. So I need to get a little bit better about this when next I go on holiday, but in any case, here we go for the month of November. In the month of November I participated in the Once Upon A Readathon. I was Team Huntsman. I will have the information for that readathon and its creators down below. I will not have all of them because it is co-hosted by like 16 booktubers, but I will have the Twitter page and all of those things linked in the description box so that you can go and check it out in case you want to be up to date in case it happens again. So for that readathon I read 6 books I think in total. I will be kind of going through them throughout this video if I can remember why I read these books, but let's start out with the first book that I actually finished, which was immediately for this readathon, and that was right before taking the train to Italy, and that is Once Upon a Time in the North by Philip Pullman. I don't have too much to say about this one. This is a novella taking place within the world of his Dark Materials. In terms of the reading order, this is one that takes place before his Dark Materials trilogy starts, so it's one that you can read before, but you can basically read it at whichever point within the trilogy that you want to, because it is not necessarily the case that you need this information to be able to enjoy it. It is a little bit of the backstory of two of the characters that you meet along the way in his Dark Materials at one point kind of indicate that they know one another, and so this is the story of how they met one another. It was enjoyable, but I also didn't get too much out of it. It's not one that I would recommend. I wouldn't say that if you enjoy his Dark Materials you need to have read it, or that you need to read this in order to enjoy his Dark Materials. It's just a little bit of an extra in case you're obsessed with his Dark Materials, but I personally won't be rereading this, for example, I think. With this book I immediately completed the first step, and I completed every single prompt within that step, I believe. I don't fully remember all the prompts, I think I used this... No, I didn't complete all the prompts, I think. I used this to include royalty because one of the characters is royalty within his Dark Materials. I used it to complete the prompt for having once upon or time in the title, and the hard modes for having all of those in its title, but I think there was a third prompt that I didn't complete this with. But so this was my step 1 for Once Upon a Readathon. Then I left for Italy. And in Italy I had much more ambition than what ended up happening, but that was also just normal. I also knew that probably I was kind of stretching myself thin there, because on holiday one of two things can happen. Either you're reading tons or you're reading almost none, and the way that I usually go on holiday means I'm not reading all that much. Because most of my holidays are cultural holidays. I want to visit things, I want to have seen stuff, and then there's usually not that much time left for actual reading. But so on the way to Venice I already got quite a chunk of this one done, and this is The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick, which is an epic high fantasy book that I was gifted by Tufty, a lovely subscriber of mine. And so Mask of Mirrors, Venetian inspired fantasy, so obviously I was going to pick it up on my way to Venice. So in this one we are following our protagonist called Ren. Ren used to be a kid who grew up in a sort of criminal organization. She, along with 2 of the other children from that organization, kind of killed their sort of owner, so to speak, the person who was in charge of them, and then kind of fled the scene. And so we're looking at them decades later as they return to their hometown in order to try and swindle a rich family within this society. However, what they don't know is that this family itself is actually in financial trouble as well. We are following multiple characters. It's a multi-POV story, and what I really enjoyed about this one is that you have a big cast of characters, and a big cast of characters who all have their own motivations, some of which are known to you, some of which aren't. And these different motivations can kind of sometimes coalesce but also clash with one another, resulting in interesting dynamics and interesting choices being made and interesting twists, in interesting twists and turns to the way that the plot rolls out. This for the first half reads relatively like realistic fiction, but then around the midway point we do get some sort of like dreamscape, so to speak, and so it definitely dives more into the fantastical. There's a lot of links with a sort of like tarot system, so to speak, with the astrology of this world. And an interesting character to keep an eye out for is the Rook, which is this sort of like Zorro-esque character within this world. While I originally was fearing that it was gonna be super predictable who this character was, I still ended up being unsure in the final sort of like 10% of the book who it was gonna turn out to be. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. When I finished it, I immediately wanted to dive into the second book, which I will hopefully do as soon as possible. I am hoping to get it around the Christmas period, and so to potentially already dive into it in January. The third book within this trilogy, Labyrinth's Heart, I believe, is coming out in July, so I do want to be ready for its release in July. So yeah, highly enjoyed this one and highly recommend as well. This one completed my step 2, and I am definitely going to forget everything about the prompts here, because the only thing that I know for sure that one of the prompts had to do with the colors on the cover, and for that I landed hard mode. And then I picked up 2 books in Italy. I originally was going to buy 3. I was going to buy one in Venice, Bologna and Turin, the 3 cities that I went to, but I ended up going with just the 2 because I knew, because in Venice I was like, okay, I'm never going to finish Mask of Mirrors during my time here in Venice. And I also actually in Venice never really found an English book that interested me, because I only found like secondhand stores, and I wanted an English book that was a translation from the Italian, and I never found them there. But so in Bologna I then picked up The Lost Daughter by Elena Ferrante. So this is a standalone by her. She is most well known for her Neapolitan, not a trilogy, a quadrilogy, I don't know whether that's the word for it or not. But so in The Lost Daughter we are looking at this middle-aged woman who, she has 2 grown-up daughters at this point in time, and so she's basically kind of living her life on her own. She has divorced her husband, I believe, and so she's going on a sort of holiday on her own, and while she's there she kind of gets this fascination with this Neapolitan family that is frequenting the beach alongside her, and interesting choices are made. I enjoyed the writing style, I enjoyed the sort of like atmosphere to this book, but it never really blew me away neither. So it's a type of book which makes me go like, okay, I would be open to reading more Elena Ferrante. I'm not convinced yet that, you know, she's a favorite author or anything like that. She's definitely not that at this point in time, but there was enough there to make me go like, okay, I could see that depending on a story or a little bit more of a page length, I could potentially really like some of her other works. So I do have an interest in reading some of her other works, potentially diving into the Neapolitan quadrilogy, but I also don't, like, it's not a priority neither. And with this one I completed step 3. Part of the prompt had to do with family, and that's the only one that I really remember. And a new to you author, because Elena Ferrante is a new to me author. Next book that I purchased was The House on the Hill by Cesare Pavese. This is a book set in Turin, and so I bought this book in Turin. It's an Italian classic. It takes place around the end of World War II, and our protagonist is basically kind of hiding in the hills surrounding Turin in a house inhabited by 2 elderly women, and it's very much looking into the end of war period, post-war period, and the sort of like political climate of the days, the political atmosphere living amongst this reticence between the shame of the shame surrounding the fascist regime, the wish to make changes, and this sort of like bleak outlook on whether they're even able to change or not. I ended up DNFing this. I don't even remember how far I got. I definitely got to page 54 because I marked it, but ultimately I just wasn't getting much out of this. This is very much melancholy, it's very much slow, reflective, and our protagonist is very much a passive character. What I enjoyed about my read was that I've just returned from Turin when I was reading this, and so I could imagine the landscape very well. It takes place next to the River Po. On my last day in Turin I took a hike along the River Po, and so I could really vividly inhabit this book in that sense, but in terms of storyline there wasn't much there, because it's very much more of a reflective work, very much more of a work looking into the psyche of a nation at that point in time. And I feel like I missed a little bit of the political background to be able to fully understand the nuances of the tensions between pro-fascist, anti-fascist and stuff like that. So ultimately I put it down because I was just not enjoying it enough to continue with this one. And then I delayedly, is that a word, participated in the Cat Lady Readathon. This is a readathon hosted by Leanna from Leanna Reads. It was taking place in the month of November, in the first weekend of November, but that's a weekend in which I was traveling, and so I decided to delay it for myself. So I took part in it the weekend after I returned, so 2 weekends later. And so I read 2 cat-based books, the 2 cat-based books that I have on my shelves. First up being If Cats Disappeared from the World by Genki Kawamura. This is a book that this is somewhat of a misnomer in terms of its title, because it takes a very long time before you actually get to that particular question. So in this one we have a protagonist who finds out at the very beginning of the book that he is terminal. He will be dying very soon. I think it was just like freak discovery. I think he went to the doctor for something else and then he found out that he had some sort of a disease or something like that. That would mean that he didn't have much to live anymore. And one day he's visited by the devil, and the devil lets him know, actually tomorrow is the last day of your life. However, if you want to, you can live for one more day if you just make something disappear from this world. And so our protagonist is kind of thinking, and so our protagonist, of course, first is a little bit skeptical, but then thinks like, okay, there are tons of useless stuff in the world. If I just make one of these useless things disappear and that gives me an extra day of life, then that would be perfect. And so he is already contemplating, okay, how many things can I make disappear in order to continue on with my life for as long as possible. And what will kind of come into question throughout this process is there such a thing as a useless thing? Is there ever something that is useless? What is useless in his eye might not be useless in the eye of some other people, for example. So I enjoyed it. I was expecting a little bit more out of it. I was also just expecting a little bit different out of it. I was expecting it to fully be focused on making cats disappear from the world, and that is really only a part of this novel, and a part that happens more towards the end of the novel to begin with. But I still enjoyed it regardless. It was just a little bit underwhelming as a result of what my expectations were versus what the book was delivering. And secondly, I read She and Her Cat by Makoto Shinkai and Naruki Nagakawa. This is basically kind of collections of short stories, you can say, I think 3 or 4. However, they're interconnected. So we are first introduced to this young woman and her cat, and we kind of see the relationship between her and her cat, and also the struggles that this woman has of finding true love, of finding a connection to somebody else. And then we kind of move on to another person and their cat, or another person and the cat that kind of becomes their cat. But throughout this collection you see the links between not only the cats but also between their humans. It's told both from the perspective of the humans and of the cats, so you get to see kind of their views upon one another. And this was just wholesome. It's just like if you want a cozy hug to cuddle up under a blanket and just have a really like nice feel-good evening, then She and Her Cat will definitely suit that vibe. Next up I read an ebook. I read Carmilla, but I don't actually know who the author is. I will have the author on the screen. I was reading this one for the winter pack because through the Discord of the winter pack some of us have gotten together to kind of vote on classics that we want to read, and in the month of November we're gonna read Carmilla because it is a gothic classic, and so it kind of suits that Halloween season. We are post-Halloween, but at least you're still kind of in the transitional vibe between Halloween and Christmas, and so we read Carmilla, which I found very enjoyable in terms of its writing style. I would definitely recommend, but I would recommend going into it without knowing too much. Not necessarily because it's not enjoyable otherwise, but I just think it's more enjoyable if you don't fully know what's going on. I think it's probably, for a modern day reader, relatively easy to figure out as well. So even if you go in without knowing too much, you might already pretty early on catch on to what is happening. But yeah, I think it's still a little bit more enjoyable that way, even though I will say I knew what was happening and I still really enjoyed it because it felt like it's very short, first of all, but it's also like very digestible. It's very easy to consume, it's very easy writing style, very plot heavy as well, so the story definitely moves along at a quick pace, so it's not like a difficult classic to get through or like a slog to get through. So in this one we're looking at our protagonist. I think her name is Laura, I believe, and for the longest time, because I was listening to it on audiobook and the narrator was a guy, and so for the longest time I thought he said Lori and that it was a guy, but no, her name is Laura and she's a woman. And so this girl called Laura, she lives with her father in this sort of mansion, and then one day they kind of stumble upon a woman and her daughter upon the road. They have some sort of an accident, I think. It's already kind of hazy to me at this point in time. But so due to circumstances, the daughter of the woman that they kind of crash into ends up staying with them for a period of time while her mother is away on sort of important business. And a close friendship develops between the two girls. However, there's also some very strange behavior when this girl, Carmilla, is involved. Then I tried to read Gideon the Knight by Tamsin Muir. This is sort of like fantasy, sci-fi, high fantasy, lesbian novel, which I cannot really explain too much about because I DNF'd, and I DNF'd at a point in which I was still not really sure about what was taking place within this book, which apparently is also normal. Even people who enjoy it apparently are confused about the first book. But so Gideon the Knight lives on the 9th planet, I believe, and the 9th planet is very much, and I believe that the 9 planets are sort of like famous for being necromancers and for having a sort of like rigid culture to some extent. Gideon is very much fed up with her life there and kind of wants to escape, but she is convinced at one point to join the sort of like princess of her planet, to go to the capital planet, so to speak, and to participate in some sort of games for some reason. I don't know the reason, I don't know the aim of this particular game or something like that. I just really couldn't focus on this one. I also mainly listened to it on audio. I've tried combining audio and ebook at some point, but just this book was just not sticking into my mind at all. Plus, I really found the character of Gideon annoying. The character of Harrow wasn't much better. I found both of them just like obnoxious to the extreme. Both of, like, especially Gideon is the type of character who's just like so stand-up-ish. She's kind of like full of herself, pushing people away and things like that. And I just really couldn't get along with her all that well. And so because I was then also constantly confused about what was happening, too many side characters were being introduced and I just couldn't remember who any of them were. I was like, you know what? I don't need to continue with this. I was reading this for Queen's Witches and Valkyrie's book club. I know that Sarah, the host of the book club, also didn't have the best of time with it. It was also so reading experience for her. But some of the others, for them it was a reread, or they had previously read it already and they didn't necessarily reread it now, but for some of them it was very much a beloved book. But for me, no, this one did not work, and I only have it because I had the free ebook through the Tor.com newsletter at one point, and so I didn't feel too guilty about DNFing a book that I just had for free. Before Gideon, which completed my step 5 of the readathon, I actually completed step 4 by finishing An Echo of Things to Come by James Islington. I had read 100 pages or something like that in the month of October in this book, but I'm still counting it for the readathon. So An Echo of Things to Come by James Islington is the second book in the Lycanius trilogy. In the Lycanius trilogy we are starting off with 3 best friends. They are in a sort of like magical academy together, and they are at the point in time in which they basically have to do this final test to figure out if they can control their magical powers well enough or not. If not, they will become shadows and will lose their magical power. But one of the three actually has some difficulties with his magical powers. They don't seem to work as well for him as they do for others. The world in which this story takes place is also a world that has seen a lot of conflict between magical people and non-magical people, so that at the onset of our story, magical people are very much bound by these rules and regulations, and it's like a physical bind. They cannot break that binding, and so they are having to experience a lot of discrimination and a lot of suppression as a result of the power that non-magical people have over them. Very interesting world, very interesting story. I hear all the time that you have to read them pretty close together, and I understand that. With An Echo of Things to Come, quite a few times I was just wondering, like, am I just forgetting things because I have the memory of a goldfish, so I don't really remember very easily? So is it just my bad, or am I supposed to not know this yet? Am I supposed to not understand this yet? And I actually should still listen to sort of like a recap or a discussion video or something like that on this second book, because when it comes to the backstory of one particular character in this world, I am not fully sure that I fully grasped everything or every nuance of it. I definitely by the end of it understood a lot more of it than at the beginning, when I was kind of lost, because with that character in this book we are very much on a journey of discovering his past. But yeah, I was sometimes just like, but who? What is this culture or this society that they refer to? Am I supposed to realize who these people are? And so it was somewhat frustrating at times, but I definitely did enjoy the book a whole lot, and I enjoyed almost all of the storylines. There were some storylines that I enjoyed more than others, and definitely at certain points in the book certain storylines were less interesting to me. But definitely around the midway section of this I was like, ooh, okay, I'm fully engrossed now. I want to complete it in one go now, but then my holiday happened and I put it down for 2 weeks and I had to get back into it. But yeah, I definitely enjoyed it still, and very much looking forward to diving into the third book, which I'm also hoping to get for Christmas so that I can also continue it early in 2023. Another book that I read for step 5, which was the poll pick, is The Ember Spyglass by Philip Pullman. So this is the third book in the His Dark Materials trilogy. So this is the concluding novel, so of course I cannot say too much about my experience with this one neither, but I really enjoyed it. I had quite I'd forgotten everything about this book, let's say it like that. There were some sort of like vague elements to it that I still remembered, and I did like accidentally skip ahead to the end of the book to kind of see how many pages it was, and based on that illustration like 50 pages away from the end I was like, oh wait, now I know what that illustration refers to. But it's definitely a bittersweet ending. It's definitely a very interesting series that kind of also is interesting to read in the perspective of what children literature would be now. There's a lot of things in here that I'm like, yeah, would this be included in a children's novel nowadays? I don't know, but so many people I know read this as a child and definitely weren't like traumatized by some of the events taking place within this neither. But yeah, I really enjoyed it a lot, and I might actually enjoy it more upon rereads than I originally did. My sister was always the big His Dark Materials like fan. I read the books, but it wasn't like I don't have too much nostalgia for this, for example, and I'm very happy to see that the reread absolutely held up for this series, and that potentially I just like have a higher opinion of it now than I did before, because before it was just living in my mind as like, okay, yeah, I enjoyed it, but so much went over my head. And that, I will say, has to do with the age at which I read it, because there is a lot here, a lot of criticism here about organized religion, and that definitely went over my head as a child. But so I absolutely enjoyed this third book, and I'm so happy to have completed my reread. But I do also have 3 other novellas within this world that I will potentially read in the month of December. Oh, that was heavy. And that was it. That was the final book that I was able to complete in the month of November, which means that my physical TBR number has been dwindling down throughout this video, and as every single month it's time to add some numbers to it again, because I didn't just read books. As you've already heard throughout this video, I've also been purchasing some, so it's time to get the numbers back and running. And I actually didn't do much damage this month, because my total ends up at 23. So I still bought quite a bit, but I also read quite a lot, meaning that I reduced my TBR from 26 down to 23 this month. So reduction of 3, and in the lower half of the 20s now. So I am hoping to get it down to potentially even 18 before Christmas, and then Christmas will happen and that number will rise again, and we might even end up higher than I am right now, but that's fine. This was part of the plan. The plan was to kind of make sure that I got it down quite a bit before Christmas, at least, in the hopes that, you know, the sort of like Christmas book haul wouldn't impact my numbers too much. And so we'll see where Christmas leads us. We'll see what happens in December, and whichever way it will go, I will be happy. If I get very little books and end up with a super reasonable TBR, I will still be happy. If I end up with like tons of books and having a TBR that's way higher than expected, I will still be happy, because I will have tons of books. So it's a win-win situation, but at least I wanted to make sure that I was prepared for any possibility. So yeah, I'm gonna round up this video here. In case you have anything to share about your reading month or about the books that I read this month, please do so down below. I'll be happy to read through your comments and to respond to them, because the comments are really my favorite part of the entire booktube process. But so yeah, I'm gonna leave you guys now and see you guys for the next video. Bye!